Hello everyone. I hope that everybody of you are doing well and keeping safe. So this is Dr. Manisha Bora coming again with two new and important topics of economics, returns to scale and economy of scale. So I hope that you people have already gone through my previous lecture on systems of farming. So today I will be discussing these two important topics of economics, returns to scale and economy of scale in detail while moving through the slides. So these concepts, returns to scale and economy of scale, are basically discussed in relation to the input-output relationship, or these concepts are related to the input-output or factor-product relationship. Basically, these concepts, returns to scale and economy of scale, says about the changes in the extent or magnitude or in the level of output in response to or in relation to the changes or a given changes rather in the level of inputs. So while moving to the presentation, we would discuss and understand each one of these concepts one by one clearly. So let's proceed. So the concept returns to scale refers to the changes in the level of output because of a given proportionate change in all the inputs or all the factors of production simultaneously. Now if we go back to our previous learnings, we know that there are several classifications of inputs or factors of production, and one such classification says that inputs or factors of production can be variable or fixed. Now this classification of inputs is again based on production period. Production period, as we know, that can be short run or long run. So those inputs which can be changed or altered or can be varied in both short run and long run period is called as, those are called as variable inputs. However, the inputs or factors of production which can be varied or can be changed only in the long run period, those inputs are fixed inputs. Therefore, in order for the concept of returns to scale to happen, there must be a long run period, because for returns to scale, all the inputs must have to be varied or altered, and only in the long run period all the inputs including variable and fixed inputs can be altered. Fixed inputs can be altered or varied only in the long run period, whereas variables inputs can be altered both in short and long run period. But since all the inputs, fixed and variable, have to be altered simultaneously for this concept of returns to scale to occur, therefore a long run period is necessary for this concept. So an output response, the response of the output to, it may be increase or decrease in the input levels, change may be either in the increasing direction or in the decreasing direction. So an output response to an increase or decrease in the input levels. Inputs may be changed in both the direction. So when all these inputs involved in a production process are increased or decreased simultaneously in a certain fixed proportion is explained through this concept of returns to scale. That means all the inputs must have to be changed or altered simultaneously, and they should be altered in a certain given fixed proportion. And upon alteration of all the inputs simultaneously in a certain fixed proportion, what happens to the level of output, or what happens to the output, how it responds, this is being described by the concept of returns to scale. As I said earlier, this is a long run concept, as all the variables are varied in quantity. All variables including fixed and variable inputs needs to be changed or altered simultaneously, therefore it must have to be a long run concept. The scale of production of the farm is determined by those input factors which cannot be changed in the short period. Basically, the variable inputs Say for example, in case of agricultural farm, like seed fertilizers are generally altered in the short run period. So the scale of production is actually determined by those inputs, the fixed inputs, which cannot be altered in the short run but only in the long run period. And if all these inputs are altered simultaneously, then what would happen to the output level? This would be described by the returns to scale. So again, returns to scale may be increasing, constant or decreasing. So what are different types of returns to scale, like increasing, constant or decreasing? How it happens, we will discuss one by one in our succeeding slides. So what is increasing returns to scale? So in this case of increasing returns to scale, when the inputs or the factors of production are increased in a given proportion, or when these inputs are changed in an increasing direction in a given proportion, fixed proportion, then it will make the output increase in a greater proportion. And in this case, the returns to scale are said to be increasing. If the inputs are changed in a proportion, say for example, all the inputs are being changed by 2 units, then the output, it may get changed by 4 units. Means increase in input is less than proportionate increase in input is less than proportionate increase in output. That means output proportion of increase of output is more or greater than the proportion of increase in the input. And say in case of any company or firm, this is a beneficial situation. Proportionate increase in all factors of production, they gives rise to, or they results in a more than proportionate increase in output. And generally, if we recall our classical production function, so there are 3 stages of classical production function: first, second and third. So first and third are irrational zone, and the second zone is called as rational zone. So in the first stage of production function, we generally find this type of increasing returns to scale, and therefore it is always advised not to stop our production in the first stage, but we should continue our production process up till the completion of the second stage or the rational zone, because in the first stage we always have increasing returns to scale. So in this increasing returns to scale, marginal products, we know what is average product, what is marginal product, etc., total product. So marginal product is change in the total product due to change in the inputs. So marginal products, in this case increasing returns to scale increases always. So next is constant returns to scale. As the name suggests, when all the inputs are increased in a given fixed proportion, the output increases in the same proportion. So when all the inputs are increased in a given proportion and outputs also increased in the same proportion, we call that situation as constant returns to scale. Or constant returns to scale is said to prevail when inputs are increased in a given proportion and output also increases in the same proportion. And when this constant returns to scale prevails, in that case we call that production function as homogeneous production function of first degree or homogeneous function of degree 1. So this needs to be remembered when there is a constant returns to scale, or when the increase in the input, simultaneous increase in all the inputs in a given proportion leads to a same proportionate change in the output level, then we call it as constant returns to scale. And when this happens in case of the production function, then that production function is said to be homogeneous production function of degree 1. And in case of constant returns to scale, it is quite evident that the average output would remain constant. So now what is decreasing returns to scale? So from the previous learning, we can easily guess that what may be decreasing returns to scale. This is just opposite of increasing returns to scale. In this case, proportionate increase in all the inputs results in less than proportionate increase in output. That means increase in input is more than increase in the level of output. And in this case, the returns to scale is said to be decreasing. Now, why this decreasing returns to scale happens? If we see generally, when there is an increase in inputs, there should be increase in output, but this always does not happen. After a set period, say after some fixed period, when we increase the input, output would not increase in proportion to that. Rather, we would have increase in cost because of increase in the level of input. So again, this can be called as the reason of double loss. Cost is also increasing and we are also not getting increasing output due to increase in the level of input. Therefore, this decreasing returns to scale is also otherwise known as the law of diminishing returns. So I think we have already studied and understood what is law of diminishing return. So this decreasing returns to scale or the law of diminishing return, it starts to happen after the completion of the stage 2 of classical production function. So in the graph below, you can see that in the first stage, stage 1, there is increasing returns to scale. Second stage, there is constant returns to scale. And in the third stage, there is decreasing returns to scale. So now, how we can measure the returns to scale? So by looking at the production function, how we can say that whether the returns to scale or in case of this production function is increasing or decreasing or constant. So there is a formula in order to calculate the returns to scale, and this returns to scale is generally measured by fitting a Cobb-Douglas or power production function, and after that by adding or summing the exponents of this production function, which are also called as production elasticities of the inputs, we would get some values, and depending upon that values we can say whether the returns to scale is increasing, decreasing or constant. The production function in power form or Cobb-Douglas production function would look like this: y equal to ax1 to the power b1, x2 to the power b2, dot 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 up to xn to the power bn. In this case, y is the total output, x1, x2 up to xn are the variable inputs, and b1, b2 up to bn are the elasticity coefficients. So returns to scale would be measured like this by summing up all the elasticity coefficients b1, b2 up to bn. So if the summation of this elasticity value gives a result which is less than 1, we call the returns to scale is decreasing. And if the summation of this elasticity values gives a result which is equal to 1, in that case returns to scale is constant. Or if the summation of this elasticity coefficients gives a result which is greater than 1, then we say that increasing returns to scale prevails. So these things we need to remember, the values and their economic implications. So here I am trying to show how to measure returns to scale with the help of an example, numerical example. Estimate returns to scale from the given production function. The production function is like this: y equal to 10, x1 to the power 0.1, x2 to the power 0.4, x3 to the power 0.2 and x4 to the power 0.08. Here, as you know, y is the output in quintal, x1 is say land input in hectare, x2 is say seed in kg, x3 fertilizer in kg, and x4 say labor in man days. So this is a hypothetical example. So now we need to calculate returns to scale. We know that returns to scale is nothing but the summation of the elasticity coefficient, that is summation I goes from 1 to n, and here n is 4. since there are 4 variable inputs: land, seed, fertilizer and labor. So returns to scale, summation of I goes from 1 to 4 BI. So what are the BI values? B1, B2, B3, B4, 0.10 plus 0.40 plus 0.20 plus 0.08. The summation will give the result as 0.78, and since 0.78 is less than 1, so we can say that returns to scale in this example is decreasing. So this is very easily we can comprehend. So by now we have understood what is returns to scale, and in our previous lectures we also came to know about different laws of returns, and one of such law is law of variable proportion. And this law of variable proportion and returns to scale looks somewhat similar. Although there are similarity between these two laws, there exist some differences too. So let's look at the comparison of law of variable proportion and returns to scale. In case of law of variable proportion, it describes the response in output when a single input is varied. But as we come to know that in case of returns to scale, it describes the response in output when all the inputs involved are varied in equal proportions. So since a single input is varied, in case of law of variable proportion, there must be at least one factor which is to be constant, or which is to be kept constant or fixed. But in case of returns to scale, all factors are varied. In case of law of variable proportion, factors are combined in different proportion, but the proportion of combination among the factors remains same in case of returns to scale. Law of variable proportion is always related to the short run production function, where at least one variable is fixed. But returns to scale is related only to long run production function, where all the inputs or factors are variable. In case of law of variable proportion, output exhibits 3 stages: increasing, constant and diminishing. And as we have already seen, in case of returns to scale also, the output exhibits all these 3 stages. This is one similarity. Then in case of law of variable proportion, the increasing returns are due to better use of fixed factors. However, in case of returns to scale, increasing returns are due to appearance of internal economies, and in these internal economies we will be discussing in our next slide. Then maximum output in case of law of variable proportion is due to the best proportion between fixed and variable factors, whereas maximum output is due to optimum size of production in case of returns to scale. Diminishing returns are due to inefficiency arising out of overutilization of fixed factors beyond the optimum point. When the fixed factors are utilized beyond the optimum point, then diminishing returns occurs in case of law of variable proportion. However, in case of returns to scale, diminishing returns occurs due to internal diseconomies. So this internal economy and diseconomy of scale I'll be discussing in our next slides. Another concept related to returns to scale is economy of scale, and the opposite of economy of scale is diseconomy of scale. Now what do we understand from economy of scale? When the input changes in a proportion which is less than the proportionate change in the output, or in other words, when the proportionate change in output is more and the proportionate change in the input is less, in that case we see economy of scale, or we can say that the increasing returns to scale, in case of increasing returns to scale we can see economy of scale, whereas in case of decreasing returns to scale we can see diseconomy of scale. Now by the word scale we refer that the size of operation of a business or a farm or any venture. So here economies of scale refers to the cost advantages that a business obtains due to expansion. Now, generally we see that due to increase in the size of operation or due to expansion, a business venture experiences cost advantages. One reason may be due to decrease in the per unit fixed cost. Since quantity produced increases, fixed cost remains same. Fixed cost means costs which are incurred on fixed inputs. Since the fixed cost remains same, however, the quantity produced increased, because of which the per unit fixed cost per unit of production or per unit of output decreases, because of which the venture or the business experiences cost advantages. So, economies of scale, in other words, refers to the reductions in unit cost as the size of the facility and the usage level of other inputs increases, whereas these economies of scale are the opposite. Now, why these economies of scale occurs? So, if a business or any firm increases its scale or size of operations, sometimes there might occur poor management, less supervision, and because of which the production level might come down. And these are the reasons why these economies of scale may occur. So if the economies or these economies of scale are to take place, not only must output change, but each of the inputs must change in the same proportion. So this is a concept similar to returns to scale. In case of returns to scale also, we need to change every input, including variable and fixed input. So in this case also, not only we have to change the output, but we need to change all the input variables involved. Then and then only economies or diseconomies or scale may take place. Now, the common sources of economies of scale may be, what are the reasons for economies of scale? One may be bulk buying of materials, because of which we can experience cost reduction. Bulk buying of materials through long-term contracts, increasing the specialization of managers, then obtaining lower interest charges when borrowing from banks, and having access to a greater range of financial instruments, and taking advantage of returns to scale in the production function. So, economy of scale is the advantage of returns to scale, the concept of returns to scale in the production function, and this may occur because of these reasons. So, as I said earlier, the scale economy advantages arises due to the inverse relationship between per unit fixed cost and the quantity produced. So, once the scale or the size of the operation has been increased, or all the inputs variables has been increased, including fixed and variable inputs, and after that when production starts or production begins, then if the quantity of output increases, then with the increase in quantity of outputs, the per unit fixed cost will get reduced, because the fixed costs are the costs which are related to the fixed inputs. So if the production of output changes, then the fixed cost would remain same, because only the variable inputs increases or changes with the change in the level of output, and fixed inputs remains same with the change in the level of output, and therefore the greater quantity of output produced, the lower the per unit fixed cost would happen. Now, if the scale of a firm is to increase, then each input, fixed and variable, must also increase proportionately. As I said earlier, before production starts, if the scale is to increase, all the inputs, including fixed and variable, must increase proportionately. So that means, in other words, returns to scale has to prevail. In case of returns to scale, what happens? All the inputs, including fixed and variable input, increases. Therefore, similarly, in case of economy of scale also, this is a concept related to or similar to returns to scale, where all the inputs including fixed and variable changes or increases proportionately. Now, the term economy or diseconomy of scale refers to what happens when all input categories are increased proportionately. So, in the previous slide I have already described, if all the input variables are increased proportionately and output increases more than the proportionate increase in inputs, then economy of scale occurs. And if all the inputs are changed proportionately or increased proportionately, but output increases but the proportion of increase is less than that of the input, in that case the diseconomy of scale prevails. If all input categories are doubled and output also doubles, means the proportion is same. Proportion of increase is same in case of input and output. All input categories are doubled and output also doubles. Neither economies or diseconomies of scale are said to exist. In that case, when the proportion of increase is same in case of input and output, then neither economies nor diseconomies of scale prevails. And if output more than doubles due to doubling of inputs, economies of scale exist, and if output does not double due to doubling of inputs, diseconomies of scale exist. With this, I am coming to the conclusion of this chapter on returns to scale and economy of scale. Hope you would find the presentation helpful in understanding the concept of returns to scale and economy of scale. Very soon I'll be coming with a new chapter or new lecture on economics. Till then, study well and keep safe. Thank you.